Hi guys, welcome back to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And for today I thought, why not sit by the fire? It's kind of a chilly day. Thought it would add some ambiance to our reading today. So hopefully you enjoy it. And hopefully my back doesn't get too hot. It's pretty warm right now. All right, so Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We are on chapter 13, The Big Day Arrives. When we finished chapter 12, Charlie had found the fifth golden ticket, and he and Grandpa Joe were going to be the ones going to the chocolate factory the next day. And remember when we ended, the house was full of reporters, and Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them around midnight so Charlie could finally go to bed so he wouldn't be too tired to go to the chocolate factory. Chapter 13, The Big Day Arrives. The sun was shining brightly on the morning of the big day, but the ground was still white with snow, and the air was very cold. Remember, it's February 1st. Outside the gates of Wonka's factory, enormous crowds of people had gathered to watch the 5 lucky ticket holders going in. The excitement was tremendous. It was just before 10 o'clock. The crowds were pushing and shouting, and policemen with arms linked were trying to hold them back from the gates. Right beside the gates, in a small group that was carefully shielded from the crowds by the police, stood the 5 famous children, together with the grown-ups who had come with them. You know what I just realized? Isn't it interesting that all the ticket holders were children? No adults won any of those tickets. The tall, bony old figure of Grandpa Joe could be seen standing quietly among them, and behind him, holding tightly onto his hand, was little Charlie Bucket himself. All the children, except Charlie, had both their mothers and their fathers with them, and it was a good thing that they had, otherwise the whole party might have gotten out of hand. They were so eager to get going that their parents were having to hold them back by force to prevent them from climbing over the gates. "Be patient," cried the fathers. "Be still, it's not time yet. It's not 10 o'clock. Behind him, Charlie Bucket could almost hear the shouts of the people. No, he couldn't almost hear them, he could hear them. Charlie Bucket could hear the shouts of the people in the crowds as they pushed and fought to get a glimpse of the famous children. "There's Violet Beauregard," he heard someone shouting. "That's her all right. I can remember her face from the newspapers." "And you know what?" somebody shouted back. "She's still chewing that dreadful old piece of gum she's had for 3 months. Ugh, look at her jaws. They're still working on it." "Who's the big fat boy?" "That's Augustus Gloop." "So it is. Enormous, isn't he?" I have a great picture, but it's kind of big. It goes all the way across the book. So I'm going to hold it here. You find all the characters. You see Charlie and Grandpa Joe. I think they're all the way at the back. See the kid with all the guns. All right. Fantastic. Who's the kid with the picture of the Lone Ranger stenciled on his windbreaker? That's Mike Teavee. He's the television fiend. He must be crazy. Look at all those crazy pistols he's got hanging all over him. "The one I want to see is Veruca Salt," shouted another voice in the crowd. "She's the girl whose father bought up 500,000 candy bars and then made the workers of his peanut factory unwrap every one of them until they found the golden ticket. He gives her anything she wants, absolutely anything. She only has to start screaming for it and she gets it." Ugh, dreadful, isn't it? Shocking, I call it. "Which one do you think is her?" "That one, over there on the left, the little girl in the silver mink coat." "What? She's a little girl and she's wearing a mink coat?" If you don't know what that is, a mink is a little animal. This is a sad thing. A mink is a cute little furry animal, and they take its coat, they take its fur and turn it into a coat. It's very expensive. "Which one is Charlie Bucket?" "Charlie Bucket? He must be that skinny little shrimp. When they say that, they mean like a little person, like a really short kid. That skinny little shrimp standing beside the old fellow who looks like a skeleton, right close to us. Just there. Do you see him? Why, doesn't he have a coat on in this cold weather? Don't ask me. Maybe he can't afford to buy one. Jeepers, he must be freezing. Charlie, who was standing only a few paces away from the speaker, gave Grandpa Joe's hand a squeeze, and the old man looked down at Charlie and smiled. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock began striking 10. Bong, bong, bong. Think all the way up to 10. I'm not going to do it. Very slowly, with a loud creaking of rusty hinges, the great iron gates of the factory began to swing open. The crowd became suddenly silent. The children stopped jumping about. All eyes were fixed upon the gates. There he is, someone shouted. There he is, that's him. And so it was. Chapter 14. Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. Think of the kind that you think of like Abraham Lincoln wearing. He wore a tailcoat. It's like a tuxedo with the tails hang down like you think of a penguin. He wore a tailcoat made of a beautiful plum-colored velvet, so like purple. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves, pearly gray. And in one hand, he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Remember when I had to have a cane after my knee surgery? His is nicer, though. Covering his chin, there was a small, neat, pointed black beard, a goatee. And his eyes were most marvelously bright. Excuse me. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you at the same time. His whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And oh, how clever he looked! How quick and sharp and full of life! He kept making quick little jerky movements with his hand, cocking his head, cocking it this way and taking it that way, and I'm sorry, excuse me, with those bright twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, and he spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates, and he called out, "Welcome, my little friends, welcome to the factory." His voice was high and fluty, like it sounded like a flute. "Will you come forward one at a time, please," he called out, "and bring your parents, and then show me your golden ticket, and give me your name. Who's first?" The big fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down, shaking his hand with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you! Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And are these your parents? How nice! Come in, that's right. Step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everyone else. "My name," said the next child to go forward, "is Veruca Salt." "My dear Veruca, how are you? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that a verruca was a sort of a wart that you got on the sole of your foot. But I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope that you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father? Oh, how are you, Mr. Salt? And Mrs. Salt? Overjoyed to see you both. Yes, the ticket is quite in order. Please go in." Here's a picture of Veruca Salt. You can see she has a little fur coat on. The next 2 children, Violet Beauregard and Mike Teavee, came forward to have their tickets examined, and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka shaking their hands. And last of all, a small, nervous boy whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, well, well. So there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" "Yes, yes. I read all about it in this morning's paper. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad. I'm so happy for you. And this? Is this your grandfather? Well, I'm delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted. All right. Excellent. Is everybody in now? 5 children? Yes. Good. Now will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin. But do keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the proceedings. Oh, dear me, no." Whew, he's exhausting, isn't he? Just talks and talks and talks. Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron entrance gates slowly closing behind them. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a last look back at them. Then, as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the outside world disappeared. "Here we are," cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through this big red door, please. That's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because of the workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate." That feels like a clue. Something about where they're from. "They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "But who are these workers?" asked Augustus Gloop. "All in good time, my boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. "Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Are all of you inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you." Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor. Do you know what a corridor is? It's a hallway in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could have easily driven inside it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. So this corridor, this hallway, was so wide a car could be in it, and it was so long. "How lovely and warm," whispered Charlie. "I know, and what a marvelous smell," answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee, and burnt sugar, and melting chocolate, and mint, and violets, and crushed hazelnuts, and apple blossom, and caramel, and lemon peel. And far away, in the distance, from the heart of the factory, came a muffled roar of energy, as though some monstrous, gigantic machine were spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. "Now this, my dear children," said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise, "this is the main corridor. Will you please hang your coats and hats on those pegs over there, and then follow me? That's the way. Good. Everyone ready? Come on then. Here we go." He trotted off rapidly down the corridor, with the tails of his plum-colored velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. It was quite a large party of people, when you came to think of it. There were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, so 14 in all. You can imagine that there's a good deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. "Come on," cried Mr. Wonka. "Get a move on, please. We'll never get round today if you dawdle like this." You know what dawdle means? DAWDLE, dawdle. It's to like poke along. Soon He turned right off the main corridor into another slightly narrower passage. Then he turned left. Then he turned left again. Then right. Then left. Then right. Then right. Then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren. Do you know what that is? A rabbit warren is like rabbit tunnels under the ground, with passages leading this way and that way in every direction. "Don't you let go of my hand, Charlie," whispered Grandpa Joe. "Notice how all these passages are sloping downwards," called Mr. Wonka. "We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep down below the surface." "Why is that?" somebody asked. "There wouldn't be nearly enough space for them up on top," answered Mr. Wonka. These rooms we are going to see are enormous. They're larger than football fields. Now you have to think about that for a minute. A football field is super huge. I want to say that would be bigger than our whole playground. Each room. Goodness. No building in the world would be big enough to house all these rooms. But down here, underneath the ground, I've got all the space I want. There's no limit, so long as I hollow it out. Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping deeper and deeper and steeper downhill now. Then suddenly Mr. Wonka stopped. In front of him, there was a shiny metal door. The party crowded around. On the door, in large letters, it said, "The Chocolate Room." And that's where we end today. See you tomorrow.